humanist perspective presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow. Hello and welcome again to our program. I'm Harry Greenberger, the president of the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association. Today we have some folks here who are going to talk to us about a subject that is new to me and may be new to many of you, which is called philosophical counseling. And on our show today we have three folks who are going to enlighten us. We've got David O'Donohue, who is a philosophical counselor. On his left is Sarah Shelton, who is a licensed counselor, and David Bernstein, who is a lot of things. Now, I did a little research on philosophical counseling, and I found the introduction here interesting. It says it's rooted in the Socratic tradition, which viewed philosophy as a kind of therapy for the soul. Well, I didn't know that Socrates that had been attributed to him. So tell us what this is all about.
Okay, yeah, I think it's nice to see that attribution to Socrates is there, because I think that was the original impetus of philosophical counseling, since Socrates very much had a dialogic style in his presentation. You know, he was known as the wisest man by the oracle because he didn't know, and he claimed he didn't know anything. So he would ask people, tell me about justice, tell me about truth, and people would have to reflect on that and think about what those things meant to them. So it was very similar to counseling in many ways, a kind of an open-ended question, a chance of going back and forth, discussing ideas. I got into philosophical counseling. I have been trained as a clinical psychologist. I was teaching in Seattle at Antioch University, heard about a conference up in Vancouver on this strange thing called philosophical counseling, and that was the first international conference. They've since had, I think, 10 more. And was exposed to a number of philosophers who wanted to use philosophy as a way of helping people with everyday problems. So in other words, someone would come to a philosopher instead of to a psychologist or to a psychiatrist, and they would share their issues, their problems that they were having, and the philosopher, using the techniques and the sources of wisdom from philosophical traditions, would work with them.
Does a person who has a graduate degree in philosophy, is that person called a philosopher?
Well, that's an interesting question.
Well, because you were referring to people came to talk to philosophers, and I wondered how you became one.
Yeah. That's a very, that's an issue where, when does one become a philosopher? Is it, many people claim that they teach philosophy but are not themselves philosophers. What do you think about that? Do you think that there's philosophers out there among us, or that we're all kind of aspiring to be?
I think that we were talking earlier about, I think that we live in a culture where we put a lot of emphasis on degrees. We put a lot of emphasis on something that you can hold up and you can show that you have attained a certain level of education. I think that...
And you're suggesting that maybe that's an overemphasis of formal education?
Yeah, I think that may be an overemphasis.
And can a person call himself and be qualified as a philosopher without having studied it at a university level or without having any kind of degree? Can who can? Do you have any kind of an organization that people belong to?
Well, the idea of licensing and creating some kind of standards for the public, because
yes.
psychologists, social workers, all of the people in the other helping professions have that.
Yes.
In Europe, where it's much better developed than in the United States, the reason why many people have not heard it here is it's just not been very popular. It was we got an article in the New York Magazine, you know, part of the New York Times, many years ago. We had a full expose on it, but this country is behind Europe in a lot of ways, where there are actually programs set up, master's programs that are training philosophical counselors. They get a degree, they have exams, they have to reach a certain level of competency before they're able to practice.
All right.
We're not at that place yet. We don't have any standards. The philosophers aren't really aware of what social science people had to go through in order to get validated in terms of working with people. And I think philosophers often just think, this is a great idea, we should just be doing this. And they don't see that you've got to, and especially in America, where we're a very pragmatic country, where we want to see that something that they're doing is going to actually influence a part of their life.
I'm reading here, it says that the oldest association of philosophical counseling and practice in the United States is the National Philosophical Counseling Association, NPCA. Are you in any way associated with them, or what function do they perform?
The organization that I know that is the oldest is the organization, the American Association of Counseling and Psychology, but they may have changed their name. This may be the new name. They were the ones that were often having presentations at philosophical conferences, just bringing up the question, can we do philosophy as counseling?
Yes, well, this says that this NPCA, formerly called the American Society for Philosophy, Counseling, and Psychotherapy.
And psychotherapy, that's the organization.
So are you all performing psychotherapy or not?
Well, I don't... No, I don't think that people here in this country are doing it as a profession. They're not. They don't put out their shingles, and they don't take clients. There are some that claim to be able to have conversations. But one of the things that philosophical counselors often say is, we're not here to help people. We're not here to solve their problems. We're not here to make their life better. In fact, philosophy may make their life worse. We're here to have them reflect on deeper meanings of where their life is at this point. Based on a particular historic philosopher, or, you know, if someone comes in and says, well, how do I fit in with so-and-so's philosophy? How does that work? Well, different philosophers have different approaches. For every philosopher, there's a different approach, and some philosophers are Nietzschean. Some philosophers are more Socratic. Some are more like cognitive behavioral therapists, where they're really working with concepts of rationality and all. So it can be widely diverse what these people are doing. Now, I also read, and I'm familiar with,
non-directive counseling. Many years ago, I got a degree in psychology, and the school I went to, which had a clinic, practiced non-directive, which meant you listened to your patient or whatever, and you would say, uh-huh, mm-hmm. Is that part of what you all do?
Well, it can be very open-ended. In other words, if some of us, and I'm in that boat where there is I want to focus on the client's words, their reactions, their own life, and then I try to bring forth the philosophers that I know and have them be in kind of the room with me as advisors, as we're going to demonstrate in a little bit, where I'm trying to let the client more or less lead me into what her dilemmas are at the time.
How do people know about you and decide to come talk to you all?
Well, we're exposing you all to this here, but I don't see clients actually now in my own life. I've chosen to do other things. I just think it's a very interesting movement out there.
All right, but you are a counselor. Mm-hmm. Do people come to you for philosophical counseling?
I would not consider myself solely a philosophical counselor. I consider myself more psychodynamically influenced, but sometimes philosophical issues do come in. I think that many people come in talking about issues that could fall under the category of anxiety, that existential counseling does address anxiety extensively. So sure, occasionally I think that it does enter nicely into the counseling relationship.
All right, well, David, how do you fit into all of this?
Well, I'm a student of philosophy, and I help David with his organization, the New Orleans Lyceum, and we run a philo cafe. So we have a public meeting where we discuss philosophical issues.
And what do you think of this whole thing?
You facilitate those discussions, or
I do one of them in Faubourg St. John neighborhood.
All right.
Well, it seems to me if you're helping someone with a problem and they're going to demonstrate how this works, you really can't guide them very well unless you have some idea of where you're going. I mean, if you haven't considered what it means to live a good life, for instance, or to be authentic, I mean, how are you going to help someone else? Or if you can't model that yourself, it's just kind of basic common sense, I think, that you have to know something about life to be a helper to others.
Now, as you know, our organization is non-religious. We're not anti-religious, but we just, that's who we are. Does religion enter into any of this counseling?
Not usually. We try to steer clear because there's a whole field of pastoral counseling. So we try to stay clear of dilemmas which might involve a faith, where people they can discuss with their ministers or with pastoral counselors more on a faith basis.
If they're seeking faith, but suppose they realize that they have no faith and they're abandoning what they had been taught, and they wouldn't go to a minister for that. Do you get any people like that who say, well, what's the philosophy that I can adopt now?
Oh, certainly. That's a great way to get exposure to Stoicism, to maybe some ways to add meaning into their life. Maybe prior they were going on their church or their faith to organize their meaning. Philosophy can do a lot to share other perspectives that say there were a lot of people who got meaning from philosophy and not from religion. So
there is a national organization called Recovering from Religion something, because that is not easy for a lot of people. That they have some emotional and mental problems with that. Yeah. So.
Well, Harry, one thing I think philosophy does is it challenges you to live a life of integrity. So along the lines that you're talking about, I mean, when we discuss philosophy, we're asking ourselves, we're asking other people, what's the basis of your belief? And, you know, if people go, well, this becomes apparent if your beliefs aren't honed in around evidence and reason, you know, we'll help you kind of get the tools to do that. You learn critical thinking.
Well, I get the impression that in New Orleans you really are not don't have a formal operation. Other parts of the country, are they more advanced?
Not very developed in this country at this point. There are people who believe in this, who are kind of holding out the light, who talk with each other about it, but it isn't as developed as I would have liked to. It's been around now. That conference was in '94. The originator of philosophical counseling in Europe was Gerd Achenbach, who presented this in 1984. So by this time, it would have been nice to see more development, but I still think and the things we do with the Lyceum, we have a class in existentialism in the helping profession, we have reading groups with Aristotle and Plato, we have the philo cafes. People bring their own personal issues into the context. Mm-hmm. I would say we do the most philosophical counseling through the Lyceum events. Without
labeling it that, I presume.
Yeah, because it's more of a general discussion.
Now, how do those sessions go?
Well, I thank you, Harry, because I would like to demonstrate. And
I thought you would.
Sarah has offered to be the client.
Okay.
And I am going to ask her to present this as an initial session, that we have a young woman coming in to talk to a philosophical counselor about a particular dilemma.
So I came in today because I've been struggling with feeling like I sometimes lack confidence when I'm in groups of people.
And when does that come up?
I think it usually comes up when I'm finding an idea that I'm maybe positing is being challenged, and I start to wonder if maybe what I'm thinking doesn't have sufficient weight to it, or sufficient validity.
Okay, so what I hear is that you present a position and other people respond to that, and then you internally begin to question whether your position is valid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds pretty accurate.
Is that,
yeah.
Okay, and that leads you to a kind of a lack of confidence, is the word
right.
you
I start
used.
doubting what I was, my original position was.
Okay. So there are 4 philosophers that I think are relevant here, and I'd like to share with you some of their ideas, and for you to kind of tell me which of these hold the most juice, you know, which of these could be the most helpful for you in exploring, and then we'll pick 1 or 2 of those and we'll go with them. So the 4 that I see as relevant is Hegel had an idea of the dialectic, and for Hegel, knowledge is always dialogical, so that in other words, you will state an opinion, someone else might state another opinion, and by pulling away from your experience enough, you'll be able to take that opinion under consideration. So it's actually a good thing for you to be able to let go of your opinion, incorporate the other person's opinion, and maybe wait a while before a third, the synthesis, comes and develops out of that. So that would be the Hegelian contribution. And I'm very much speaking very truncatedly on these, but we can explore this more as we go. The second one has to do with Spinoza's work around adequate ideas. Spinoza believed that all ideas should come from us inside, that we should not have ideas that are imposed on us by the external world, and that we need to evaluate our ideas and to look at the source of those ideas to find out, do I really believe this? Like, we can endorse things that our parents have believed, we can endorse things that our friends believe. So he would say that perhaps your lack of confidence may be a sign that you need to evaluate whether your ideas are really coming from yourself or from other people that you've kind of taken on. Okay, number 3, Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about bad faith. And in bad faith, what you have is a condition where we have people that are inauthentic in the way that they present themselves. So he would say that we live a lot of roles that are not really in sync with who we really are. So unlike Spinoza, which would look at the ideas themselves, Sartre would look at your own authenticity, you know, whether you are living a real authentic life, and that the lack of confidence comes from that. Lastly, and I go back to Socrates, I would want to just ask you, what is your idea of confidence? What I would want to kind of deconstruct confidence and try to understand what it means for you, and then to understand what is the feeling of confidence that you might have. But I'd put it back on you, and I would set up more of a dialogue where you would let me know your notion of confidence. So those would be the four contributions. Which of those, or if any, speak to you?
Well, I liked the Hegelian dialectic because I want to be open to other people's viewpoints, and I felt that the Spinozan and the Sartrean takes didn't seem to fit well with me. In fact, it felt like I might even have to go through a period of excluding some other viewpoints. So I was more drawn to the Hegelian, where I can kind of let a little bit more in as far as what other people have to say. But I also think maybe a good place to start would be the Socratic position, so that maybe I need to know what I'm talking about before before we move on to a Hegelian approach.
Yeah, often we use words like confidence, and I'm thinking I understand what you mean by it, but I don't really know what you mean by it. And by exploring that, I'd have a better sense of when you feel confident, when you don't. You know, that kind of thing would be helpful. So so that's a very brief example of kind of the way we work.
And how does that differ from if you were a psychotherapist talking to the same person? How is that different?
Okay. In the case of psychotherapy, I would look more at psychological theories for working with Sarah. So that could be asking her family of origin stuff, like in your family, when you expressed yourself, were you put down a lot? Were there times when you didn't feel confident because you were talked out of things? I mean, so psychology has a whole nother basket full of useful and very good things. But what philosophical counseling wants to do is saying most psychologists don't read philosophy, and there has been a world out there of people working philosophically with problems. So it's just adding to the toolbox, I think.
Yeah.
Do any, to your knowledge, do established psychotherapists also incorporate philosophical counseling?
Yes, right.
And then how does, if someone is shopping for a therapist, how do they know who does what?
They can ask. They certainly can ask. And one of the chief ways that philosophy has been incorporated into psychology is through existential psychology. And so someone could ask their potential therapist, do you work with existential psychology, which is a much more, which is incorporating a lot of philosophy into the practice of psychology.
Clarify in a minute or so existential counseling.
Okay. David, do you want to address that? Do you want to address?
Well, it's kind of involved because there's lots of different existentialists, but from, let's say, Rollo May's perspective, he's interested in people being able to have the courage to be themselves. And so this involves having a mind of your own, for instance, and being able to think through things and know the grounds of your opinions. And it involves, well, really, I think, a life of heart, too, and knowing that you're being real because you're coming from your heart. And being able to do this in action. So that's sort of where it's life of that affirms who you are.
You talk a lot about authenticity, and I think that what you're saying about thinking on your own, being able to see that your ideas are congruent with who you are and your values. I think that would, I know that's a lot of what you talk about with us.
It's it's a central subject in philosophy, Western philosophy at least, and
well, when you talk about having a mind of your own, which means you don't necessarily accept what authority says is so, most religious people accept what the religious authorities tell them. Does that create some sort of a mental problem? I mean, if they come to you and you say, make up your own mind, and they've been following directives, does that make their situation better or worse?
Well, that comes under the topic of the ethics of belief, and if we try to look at this to see what are the assumptions people are making when they say something like whether it's the existence of God or any kind of metaphysical assumption. And I mean, I think we're encouraged, in philosophy, we're encouraged to have some understanding of what we believe, and so we try to hone in our beliefs to things that we can actually support, and that would be that we can, that other people who don't share our assumptions would.
You're talking about using your intelligence and logic and scientific thinking, which of course we do. We've got about a minute. You want to talk about the Lyceum and what you might want the audience to know, or?
Well, we do have the Lyceum, which offers free classes around town. You'll see the address to write. If you write there, we'll put you on our mailing list, and you would get some exposure, quite a bit of exposure to philosophy, because a number of us that teach with the Lyceum teach a lot of philosophy. So if you're even interested in just kind of getting exposed to philosophy, come to Lyceum events.
Very good. Well, I want to thank you, all three of you, for being here. I want to thank our audience for watching this one more time, and hope that you have found this enlightening. And come listen to us again next week.